Have you ever wondered what's really going on behind the concept like manifestation, beyond the modern hype? Well, it turns out there's this deep philosophical framework that's been around for ages. Today, we're going to dive into that source material. We're exploring the foundational laws of polarity, rhythm, and attraction, not just as self-help tricks, but as a really profound system for understanding reality itself. So let's start by challenging something we all just take for granted.
All right, first up, a question to get us thinking. Are love and hate really opposites? I mean, our common sense screams yes, of course they are. But the philosophy we're digging into today, it offers a completely different and honestly, a much more powerful way to look at it. So here's the game plan for this explainer. We'll start with this idea of reality being a spectrum. Then we'll look at its natural cycles, this kind of universal pendulum. From there, we'll see how these old ideas feed into the modern law of attraction, tackle some of the big criticisms, and finally uncover what might be the real prize in all of this, self-mastery.
Okay, let's get into our first big idea. This is the bedrock principle that makes everything else possible, the law of polarity. You can think of it as the basic map of reality.
This quote from a classic text called the Kybalion is the absolute key. It's saying that things we see as total opposites, they're actually just two ends of the very same thing. They don't differ in kind, only in their vibration or their degree. And here's a super simple way to wrap your head around this. Think about temperature. Hot and cold feel like completely different things, right? But they're not. They're just different points on one single spectrum of thermal energy. There's no magical line where hot suddenly stops and cold begins. It's a smooth gradient. And this principle is meant to apply to, well, everything. Physically, you've got cold and hot as poles of thermal energy. Mentally, poverty and wealth are just two poles on a spectrum of resources. And emotionally, and this brings us right back to that first question, hate and love are seen not as opposites, but as different degrees of the exact same underlying thing, emotional connection. Okay. So if opposites are just different points on the same scale, what's the point? What can you actually do with that? Well, this is where it gets practical. Mental transmutation is the art of consciously changing your position on that scale. It's about shifting your own mental state through an act of will. And here's how it's supposed to work, broken down into 3 steps. First is awareness. Just notice a negative state, like fear, but without beating yourself up about it. Second, you repolarize. So instead of fighting the fear, you pull your attention away from it and focus intensely on its positive counterpart, courage. And finally, that sustained focus creates a vibrational shift, raising your inner state until that feeling of fear just dissolves. So if polarity is the static map of reality, our next principle is what sets that whole map in motion. This is the law of rhythm, the dynamic, constant pulse of the universe. The main idea here is that everything has an ebb and a flow. There's a pendulum swing between those two poles we just talked about in everything. But I want you to pay close attention to that last phrase. Rhythm compensates. That part is absolutely crucial. You can see this principle literally everywhere. I mean, it's obvious in the natural world, like the seasons changing or the tides. But it's also there in huge societal patterns, like economic booms followed by busts, and in a really personal way, in the natural swings of our own moods and energy. Nothing ever stays still. This is that compensation idea. It basically says the bigger the swing in one direction, the bigger the swing back in the opposite direction. Think about how a crazy massive high is sometimes followed by a pretty deep low. It's presented as the universe's natural way of keeping things in balance. So does this mean we're just helpless passengers on this cosmic pendulum? The teachings say absolutely not. The path to mastering this is called the art of neutralization, and the goal isn't to stop the pendulum. That's impossible. The idea is to mentally rise above it, to find an inner center of calm where you can just watch the ups and downs of life without getting totally thrown off balance by them. You let the pendulum swing beneath you. Okay, so we've got polarity and we've got rhythm. Now let's connect these huge foundational laws to the concept that most of us are probably familiar with today, the law of attraction. It's really best understood as a modern take on these much older principles. So at its core, the law of attraction is pretty simple. It's the idea that like attracts like. Your thoughts are seen as these vibrational signals that you're constantly sending out, and the universe just responds by sending back experiences that match that vibration. So positive thoughts attract positive things, negative thoughts attract negative things. Now, while the core concepts are ancient, the way we talk about it today is actually pretty recent. The idea really started gaining steam in the 19th century New Thought movement, but it was absolutely blasted into the global consciousness with the book and film The Secret back in 2006.
And the popular formula usually gets boiled down into this three-step process. First, you ask. Get super clear on what you want. Second, you believe. This is the active part, where you use things like visualization to generate the feeling of already having what you want. And finally, you receive, which means living in a state of gratitude and openness, just ready for it to show up.
But it's not all just about thinking happy thoughts and waiting for stuff to arrive. To get a complete picture, we have to look at the pretty significant critiques and potential dangers of applying these ideas without a little bit of wisdom.
We've all seen this phrase, right? On t-shirts, on social media, everywhere. And while it sounds nice, it actually points directly to one of the biggest pitfalls of a surface-level approach to this stuff, this tendency to just deny or push away anything negative.
And this leads to something psychologists call spiritual bypassing. This is when someone uses these spiritual ideas to avoid dealing with their actual, messy human emotions. So instead of authentically processing something like sadness or anger, which is that awareness step we talked about, they just slap a positive vibe sticker over it. That's not transmutation. That's just suppression.
And the bigger criticisms are really significant and can't just be ignored. From a scientific perspective, it's widely considered pseudoscience, but the ethical critiques are even sharper. It's often accused of victim blaming, because the logic can imply that people in terrible situations somehow attracted their own misfortune. And it also tends to completely gloss over real-world systemic issues, like social injustice or economic inequality.
So, where does all this leave us? After looking at the core principles, the modern application, and the very real critiques, what's the big takeaway? Let's try to bring it all together and focus on what these philosophies suggest is the real goal. When you really put it all together, the sources suggest that the true secret isn't about manifesting a sports car. The real prize is self-mastery. It's the ability to use polarity to choose your focus, to use neutralization to ride the rhythm of life with grace, and to consciously direct your inner world no matter what the outer world is throwing at you. It's about becoming an active cause in your own life, not just a passive effect. And all of that brings us to our final slide, and one last big question to leave you with. If the goal is to rise above the pendulum of your own thoughts and feelings, to realize that you are the one observing them, not the thoughts and feelings themselves, then who or what is that observer? And that is the journey of self-mastery.